Dr. Adeline Baker had seen the data 3 times before she believed it. The graphs climbed like cathedral spires reaching toward impossible heavens. 0 reported pain across all subjects, satisfaction scores that shattered every ceiling the metrics could measure. Nexipharm's compound, whimsically designated PP7734, was supposed to be an incremental improvement over existing pleasure pathway modulators. Instead, it had somehow eliminated the refractory period between dopaminergic releases. The brain's natural brakes, those ancient safeguards that prevented overstimulation, had been chemically bypassed. Pleasure without pause. Bliss without boundaries. It was, Adeline thought as she walked through the pristine corridors of the trial facility, too good to be true. In her 17 years of pharmaceutical research, that phrase had proven itself a reliable prophet. The morning of day 14 began ordinarily enough. Adeline made her rounds, clipboard in hand, visiting each of the 24 subjects in their private rooms. The facility resembled a boutique hotel more than a hospital. Plush carpets the color of aged wine, walls painted in soothing grays that whispered rather than spoke, lighting that seemed to emanate from the air itself rather than fixtures. Room 108 housed Marcus Webb, a 43-year-old chronic pain patient who'd spent the last decade in various states of pharmaceutical twilight. Now he sat cross-legged on his bed, hands resting on his knees, eyes closed. A smile played across his features like sunlight on water. "How are you feeling, Marcus?" His eyes opened slowly, pupils dilated despite the bright morning streaming through the windows. "I'm feeling everything, Dr. Baker. Everything feels like the first sip of cold water on a hot day, but it never stops being the first sip." Adeline made a note. The metaphors had been getting increasingly elaborate. Yesterday, Subject 12 had spent 20 minutes describing how touching her bedsheet felt like swimming through silk made of laughter. She moved to room 112, Subject 19. Jennifer Moss, 28, fibromyalgia, was standing at the window, one hand pressed against the glass. Her fingers moved in slow circles, around and around and around. "Jennifer, can you hear me?" The woman didn't turn. Her hand continued its rhythmic motion against the window, that same beatific smile on her face that Adeline had seen in room 108, in room 103, in every room, now that she thought about it. "The glass," Jennifer whispered. "It's cool. It's smooth. It's perfect." Adeline stepped closer. "Jennifer, have you eaten breakfast?" "Why would I stop touching the glass to eat breakfast?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and something cold began to crystallize in Adeline's chest. She reached out, gently grasping Jennifer's shoulder to turn her around. The woman's head swiveled, but her hand remained pressed to the glass, arm twisted at an awkward angle. "Jennifer, let go of the window." "I don't want to. Please." "For me." Jennifer's hand lifted an inch, then slammed back against the glass with such force that Adeline flinched. "No," the woman said, still smiling. "No, I don't think so." Adeline backed out of the room and walked quickly toward the nurse's station, her footsteps too loud in the hushed corridor. She found Nurse Ramirez staring at a monitor bank that showed feeds from every room. On 12 different screens, subjects were engaged in repetitive motions. Stroking blankets, touching walls, running fingers through their hair again and again and again. "When did this start?" Adeline asked. "This morning." "Maybe 2 hours ago." Ramirez's voice was steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the desk. "At first I thought they were just enjoying themselves, the drug working as intended, but they haven't stopped." Subject 7 has been rubbing his forearm for 90 minutes. Adeline pulled up Subject 7's vitals. Heart rate elevated but stable. Blood pressure normal. Brain activity. The EEG made her stomach drop like a stone down a well. The neural patterns showed activity levels that shouldn't be sustainable, Waves of electrical impulses cascading through pleasure centers in patterns that looked less like normal brain function and more like a seizure composed entirely of joy. She ran to room 103. Subject 7 sat on the floor, both hands moving up and down his forearms in mirror image strokes, fingers pressing into skin that had gone red, then purple. He was humming something tuneless, eyes unfocused, that terrible smile fixed on his face like a mask. David, stop. His hands didn't pause. Couldn't pause, she realized with dawning horror. This wasn't pleasure-seeking. This was pleasure slavery. It feels good, David said dreamily. It feels so good, Dr. Baker. Even the hurting feels good. Everything feels. His fingernails had drawn blood. He didn't notice. His hands kept moving, kept stroking, slaves to sensation without the mercy of satiation. Adeline's phone buzzed. A message from Ramirez. Subject 12 just bit through her lip, still smiling. The compound had worked exactly as designed, Adeline understood now. They had eliminated the cool-down period, the crucial pause that allowed the brain to process, to integrate, to choose. Without it, pleasure became a tyrant more absolute than any pain could ever be. Because pain, at least, eventually forced you to stop. Detective Maya Reyes had developed her palette the way a pianist develops their hands. Through years of deliberate practice, countless mistakes, and an obsessive attention to detail that bordered on the pathological. She could identify 37 varieties of olive oil by taste alone, could tell you which season's rainfall produced the grapes in any decent Burgundy. It was a hobby that had started as stress relief and metastasized into something closer to religion, which was why the invitation, when it arrived on creamy cardstock that whispered of money and secrets, felt less like chance and more like destiny. You have been selected for Cairn, Thursday, 9 p.m. The address will be provided upon confirmation. Come hungry. No signature, no explanation. Just a phone number embossed in gold that caught the light like a promise. Mia knew she shouldn't go. 5 food critics had vanished in the past 8 months, their disappearances spaced precisely 6 weeks apart. Each one last seen at what they described in final social media posts as the most transcendent meal of my life. The pattern was too clean, too deliberate. The kind of pattern that made her detective's instincts scream warnings in a voice that sounded like breaking glass. But God, she was so tired. Tired of crime scenes and paperwork and the particular way that violence stained everything it touched. The invitation felt like a doorway to somewhere cleaner, somewhere that dealt in pleasure instead of pain. She texted the number. The address arrived within minutes, a warehouse in the meatpacking district, naturally. Where else would a secret supper club meet but in the bones of old industry, where the walls remembered blood? Thursday arrived wearing fog like a funeral veil. Maya dressed carefully. Black silk that moved like water, pearls her grandmother had left her, the small knife she always carried hidden in her jacket's inner pocket. Just because she was going didn't mean she was going stupid. The warehouse door was unmarked except for a small brass placard. Karen. She knocked, and the door opened onto a world that had no business existing in this neighborhood of rust and decay. The space had been transformed into something between a chapel and a dream. 20 tables, each set for one, arranged in a perfect circle around a central kitchen where flames danced behind glass walls. The lighting came from hundreds of candles suspended at varying heights, creating constellations of fire that turned the air itself golden. The scent hit her like a physical force. Rosemary and tress, aged butter, and something darker, richer, almost like iron blooming into copper. A man in white approached, his chef's coat so pristine it seemed to glow. He was perhaps 50, with the kind of face that classical sculptors spent lifetimes trying to capture. All planes and angles, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with kindness. Detective Reyes, he said, and his voice was smoke over honey. I am Julian Cairn. welcome to my table. You know who I am? Of course. I know everyone who sits in my circle. Your palate is legendary among those who understand that eating is the most intimate act of consumption we have. He gestured to a seat. Please. We begin in moments. Maya sat, her instincts still screaming, but quieter now. The other guests were arriving. Men and women dressed in expensive fabrics that whispered secrets with every movement. Faces she recognized from food magazines and culinary television. The kind of people who flew to Tokyo for a single meal, who maintained waitlist reservations at restaurants 3 years in advance. The first course arrived on a plate of black slate, something pale and delicate, garnished with microgreens and a sauce that shimmered like oil on dark water. Maya lifted her fork. The scent alone was intoxicating. Sea and earth, decay and renewal, the smell of things that had lived and died and been transformed into something that transcended both states. She ate. The world fractured into sensation. Every taste bud in her mouth fired simultaneously, a symphony of flavor that built and built until she thought she might weep from the perfection of it. Umami and sweet, bitter and salt, and underneath it all something indefinable, something that tasted like transgression and triumph mingled on her tongue. When she could think again, could see again, she found Julian Cairn watching her with eyes that held the satisfied gleam of an artist observing his masterwork. What was that? She whispered. The first course. He smiled, and there was nothing kind in it. Wagyu beef, aged 60 days. Fed on a diet I designed specifically to enhance the marbling, the tenderness, the essential flavor of the meat. The second course arrived. Then the third. Each one better than the last, each one pushing her palate into territories she hadn't known existed. By the fifth course, Maya had stopped questioning. By the seventh, she had stopped thinking about the missing critics altogether. It was only during the ninth course, something that melted on her tongue like a prayer dissolving into faith, that she noticed the photographs on the walls. Black and white images tastefully lit of people dining, their faces ecstatic, transported, completely lost in the act of consumption. She recognized one face. Gregory Marsh, food critic for The Times, missing since September. Another face. Catherine Wu, restaurant reviewer, vanished in July. Maya's fork clattered against her plate. The sound echoed in the suddenly silent room. Julian Cairn appeared beside her, and she hadn't seen him move. You understand now, he said softly. True hedonism requires transgression, detective. And the greatest transgression is to consume that which cannot be replaced. Maya's hand moved toward her jacket, toward the knife, but her body felt heavy, distant. Something in the food. Something in every perfect, transcendent bite. The critics understood, Julian continued. In their final moments, they understood that they hadn't just eaten the best meal of their lives. They had become it. Their refined palates, their educated taste, their very essence rendered down into something that could be shared, savored, appreciated by those worthy enough to understand. Maya tried to stand. Couldn't. Around the circle, the other diners were watching with eyes that held terrible understanding. They'd known. They'd all known. Don't fight it, Julian whispered. You're the final course tonight. 37 varieties of olive oil, detective. Imagine what your palate will add to the menu. The candles swam in her vision like fireflies dancing at the edge of the world. The last thing Maya tasted was copper, blooming on her tongue like a flower opening to the sun. Dr. Lena Hartwell had spent 12 years learning to recognize the particular emptiness that lived behind human eyes. Depression wore 1,000 masks, but anhedonia, the complete inability to feel pleasure, had a signature all its own. It was a void that swallowed light, a black hole where joy should have lived. In the past 4 months, she'd seen that void 17 times. 17 patients, ages ranging from 19 to 62, no common demographics except one. Each of them described their anhedonia as beginning exactly one day after the best day of my life. Lena sat in her office on a Tuesday evening. The city, beyond her window, painted in shades of amber and dying light, and spread the intake forms across her desk like tarot cards, promising only bad futures. The testimonies were unnervingly similar, as if her patients had rehearsed from the same script written in the language of loss. I met someone at the farmer's market. They seemed to understand me completely. A stranger at the bookstore recommended the perfect novel, then invited me for coffee. Someone sat next to me on the park bench, and we talked for hours about everything and nothing. Each patient described a day of perfect companionship, conversation that flowed like water finding its level, laughter that felt like coming home. And then the stranger had offered them something, a drink, a walk, a shared meal. And the day had transformed into something transcendent. Colors had seemed brighter. Food had tasted like memory and hope mingled on the tongue. Every moment had vibrated with a significance that made ordinary life feel like a rough draft of existence. And then it had ended. The stranger had left, and every day since had been ash. Food was texture without flavor. Music was organized noise. Sunsets were just light scattered by particulate matter. Even the patient's own children, their lovers, their life's work, all of it felt like watching shadows of things that had once mattered before they'd learned what mattering really meant. Lena picked up her phone and called her newest patient, Marcus Reeves, a 34-year-old architect who'd stopped showing up to work 3 weeks ago. "Mr. Reeves, this is Dr. Hartwell. I need you to describe the stranger again. Every detail you can remember." There was a long pause, filled with the hollow sound of breathing that had forgotten why it bothered. Tall, I think, or maybe average. I can't quite. Their face was kind. I remember that. Kind eyes. They were gray or maybe blue. Why can't I remember? I remember everything else about that day except them, Lena finished. "It's okay, Mr. Reeves. I think I understand." She hung up and pulled out the other interviews. Every single patient struggled to describe the stranger. The details slipped away like water through fingers, leaving only the impression of someone who had seemed exactly right, exactly what they needed in that moment. Lena had been a therapist long enough to recognize a pattern. She'd been human long enough to recognize a predator. That night, she went to the places her patients had mentioned: the farmer's market on 5th Street, the bookstore on Calloway, the park with the iron benches that overlooked the river where the city's lights trembled on dark water like trapped stars. She found them at the park just as the last light was bleeding from the sky. They sat on a bench, reading a paperback, and when they looked up at Lena's approach, they smiled with a warmth that felt like recognition, like they'd been waiting for her specifically, like she was the exact person they'd hoped to meet. "Beautiful evening," they said, and their voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It was simply right. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs, but she sat down. Up close, she still couldn't quite focus on their features. They were pleasant looking, she thought, kind, trustworthy. The exact shade of forgettable that let you vanish into any crowd. "You've been meeting people," Lena said, "giving them perfect days." The stranger's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in the air between them. Attention like the moment before thunder speaks. "I give them what they lack," the stranger said. "One day of absolute satisfaction. One day where everything aligns, where the universe bends toward their joy. Isn't that generous? And then you take it back. You take more than you gave." "No." The stranger closed their book, and Lena caught a glimpse of blank pages before it disappeared into a bag she hadn't noticed before. "I don't take anything. I simply show them what satisfaction truly feels like. Afterwards, ordinary happiness seems like a lie they've been telling themselves. Their own experiences feel counterfeit compared to that one true day." "You're killing them," Lena said, and her voice came out steady despite the cold spreading through her chest like frost claiming a window. Maybe not their bodies, but everything that makes them want to live. The stranger stood, and in the dying light they seemed taller, or perhaps the shadows around them had grown deeper. I'm a collector, Dr. Hartwell. Human capacity for joy is the rarest substance in the universe. Finite, unique, unreproducible. When I give them that perfect day, I'm not stealing their happiness. I'm simply showing them how much they have to lose. And when they spend the rest of their lives remembering, missing, longing for what they experienced, that yearning, that exquisite suffering of nostalgia for an impossible return. The stranger leaned closer, and Lena could smell something like honey left too long in sunlight. Sweetness crossed over into rot. That yearning feeds me. Every moment they spend wishing for that day back, they're giving me more of themselves than they ever gave anyone else. Love fades, passion dims, but regret for perfect joy you'll never feel again. That's eternal. Lena felt her hand moving toward her phone, but the stranger was already walking away, dissolving into the darkness beneath the trees where the streetlights couldn't quite reach. Don't try to find me again, Doctor. Their voice drifted back like smoke. Unless you want to know what that perfect day feels like, I promise you, everyone always wants to know. And I'm very, very patient. Lena sat on the bench long after they'd gone, watching the river reflect a city that suddenly seemed dimmer than she remembered. In her pocket, her phone buzzed. Another patient calling, probably. Another voice emptied of hope, asking if she could fix something that wasn't broken so much as perfectly, irrevocably changed. She didn't answer. She was too busy wondering what her perfect day would look like and hating herself for wondering. That was how it started, she understood now, with just one curious thought.